A top focus, even as the war in Ukraine, no signs of ending, Russia is now further flexing its muscles. Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued the biggest threat so far to its neighbouring nation and the world, saying Moscow will start deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus on July 7th, 8th, adding everything is going according to plan for the move. This comes in the backdrop of Kremlin accusing the United States and the West of flowing arms and ammunition into Ukraine and aiding them against Russia.
Ну, а с точки зрения безопасности, это уж мы сейчас отдельно с глазу на глаз поговорим. В целом ситуация стабильная, я бы даже сказал, хорошая, уверенная. Мы взаимодействуем в этой сфере по наиболее чувствительным вопросам, о которых мы с вами договаривались. Все идет по плану. 8 числа, как вы знаете, 7-8 июля заканчивается подготовка соответствующих сооружений, и сразу же начнем мероприятия, связанные с размещением на вашей территории соответствующих.
Будет только крепче. Ну, надо специалистам поработать, правительством, я думаю, это надо надеяться на то, что санкции отменят и что. Нам про это даже говорить не надо. Нам надо ориентироваться на свои силы и на себя. И если мы выработаем такой план действий наших, наши партнеры обязательно подключатся, я уверен, Казахстан, да и в рамках Евразес и Узбекистан, и создадим привлекательные здесь условия. Да. Я уверен, что наш союз в рамках Евразийского экономического союза будет только крепче.
All right, to take this conversation further, I have Suresh Kumar Goel, former ambassador, joining me on the show. So thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us on Mirror Now. You know, by beginning this conversation, do you think by deploying nuclear weapons in Belarus, is Putin threatening a nuke war in your opinion?
I hope not. First of all, good evening to you, Nivedhana, and to all the listeners. The problem is that when the war began last year in February, at that time also it was pretty clear that essentially it was the expansion of NATO right to the border of the Russian Federation, Crimea, and the southern borders of Russia, particularly in Black Sea, which is economically very important. I've seen this actually even from the time of 1996, 97 onwards, when there had been a great deal of difficulty about what NATO had promised and how NATO was actually going, militating against all that they promised. So this was bound to happen when Russia actually feels its security threatened. So what we are now seeing is finally Putin delivering on the threats. It had made that in case Russian security is in doubt, Russia will not hesitate in using the nuclear weapons. And therefore, now Russia is coming to the final stage of the threat, saying that we will deploy our tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Whether he will actually deliver on the threats,
Mr. Goel, just to follow up,
whether
right,
is going to walk back from the position that it is yet to be seen. Therefore, while we cannot say whether Putin is actually getting into the era of the nuclear war, but he is certainly giving clear indication that Russia feels threatened enough by NATO to be able to take the position of deploying tactical nuclear weapons. Nivedhana.
Right. Mr. Goel, just a quick follow-up question as we speak about that. How do you think the West, especially the United States, will respond to this fresh provocation by Moscow?
I don't think it's a fresh provocation. The West, even though it had been said even by Russia, I think around even 3 months ago, that they will not hesitate in deployment of the nuclear weapons if it happens. They, of course, that was the last option, but they had already given clear indication that they would do it. Again, if I recall correctly, around 2 weeks ago, the West and the NATO had again indicated that they will be able to deliver weapons in Ukraine, which could come very close to the deployment of I'm using the words very carefully, so please do pardon me if I sound vague. But the fact is that the threat of using the nuclear capability without using the full-scale nuclear war, it had begun to happen around a month ago. And therefore, I would not call it really Russia plunging into a nuclear war unexpectedly. There were sufficient indications of that in case Ukraine does not withdraw, Russia will not hesitate in deploying tactical nuclear weapons on the border. It had been there before. Nivedita. Yes.
Also, how do you anticipate this becoming the core agenda for Biden when Prime Minister Modi visits the US? How do you read into that?
Now, that's a very difficult question. It's really, really very difficult. I do hope that it does not come to a point where Prime Minister Modi has to choose either Russia or the USA. Because if that happens, we will not know. I think there's a question at the moment which even the Minister Jaishankar cannot answer. We can just keep on hoping that it will not come to the stage.
Right, Mr. Goel. As we, of course, speak about one aspect of it, stay with me. I'm going to come back to you. As in fact, we have more breaking news that's coming in and want your perspective about the same. In fact, the United States has announced a $2.1 billion military aid package for Ukraine, including ammunition for Patriot air defense systems, artillery rounds, drones, and laser-guided rocket system munitions. The pledge to deliver new air defense systems and ammunition underscored the unwavering U.S. support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion, the Pentagon said in a statement. Mr. Goel, coming back to you on this, how do you view into this situation now? The United States has announced a $2.1 billion military aid package for Ukraine. This is, of course, not the first time that we're seeing in terms of them extending support.
Do you remember that there is a video clip which is actually going viral on the social media now, where the South African point person for G20, the minister, is talking to on Hard Talk at the BBC, and where he is saying that what we are asking for is peace. The fact is that if there is a war which goes to this extent, and you just said it, $2.1 billion worth of arms aid to Ukraine. And if you recall in February when the war started, the war would not have gone for this long unless the West had come to support of Ukraine. So basically what it is saying is that, and I'm not justifying what Russia is doing, but the fact is that this war that is going on is a European war. It was started by the contest between Russia and Europe and the USA. It was started basically because NATO continued to hold the threat of expanding up to the Russian border. And Russia thought that the only way to deal with the threat is to get further into an aggressive position against Crimea and Ukraine. Therefore, it is a European plunge again. The history is repeating it. World War II, please recall, World War I was started by Europe. World War II was started by Europe. And now again, Europe is basically coming to a position where war is the only option because of its own ambitions.
Right, Mr. Goel, thank you very much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing with us the perspective on this development. But for the moment, we leave it at that and we shift our focus to